So welcome to everyone who's come, and a huge thanks in particular to all the amazing work that's been going on behind the scenes to make this event happen. A lot of people have been involved and helped to make this available and also to make it known. And especially a huge thanks to our panelists who have taken time out of their lives within a few days to bring their expertise so that we can learn from them and connect with this very difficult time, but in solidarity. So, as you know, this is about solidarity with what's going on in Ukraine. This has been set up because we have, on the assumption that we've all been wondering what we can do to help. Personally, I know, and myself, and I know people on this call are in contact with people directly in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, or from there with loved ones very directly affected. And so this is about designing a session to understand a little bit deeper what's at play and to understand how we can empower ourselves to support all those that are impacted by the war. So this is why we're calling it Connect in Solidarity. To let you know, this is hosted by the Europe chapter of the LEAD alumni group. If maybe that you don't know the LEAD program, which is run by the Stanford Graduate School of Business, many people from this call are on that program or from that program, and others will probably have seen the posts from those people on that program. That's why you're here. So welcome to all of you. That's the context that we have this open session, because we have such incredible speakers here that we can learn from, and we want to extend that impact. So we have just been having a week-long get-together called Meet a We. And this was one of the end sessions that we were doing as the Europe chapter that we turned around into a moment to connect in solidarity so that we can really understand what we can do to help. And also knowing that we have people in our community that are impacted from all the countries involved. So that's the sense of also something important to the Europe chapter is that we foster a sense of inclusion and belonging no matter what the context. So welcome. I would like to go straight to introducing the panel of experts that we have today.
Thank you, Emily, for this wonderful introduction. And we have an amazing lineup of panel experts today. To start with, we have on the panel Val Woszewska. She is a multilingual digital strategist originally from Ukraine, with extensive experience in media, social media, and audience engagement, bringing impact-led digital marketing to the world's largest human rights organization. She's leading the global digital team at Amnesty International and managing over 23 digital specialists as the global head of digital engagement. Today, she will share with us her first-hand experience with the conflict in Ukraine and practical opportunities for companies to support those impacted directly by the conflict. We also have with us Elodie Journeau. Elodie is a lawyer, legal expert, and trainer at the Cabinet Journeau and the forum Refugee Cozy. She specialized in immigration law, asylum law, French nationality law, international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and isolated migrant children. She is here to share with us her extensive experience in asylum law and refugee rights and bring her perspective on the reality of those on the move, drawing on her experience in Calais and Lesbos. She will also help us reflect on what people can do to support refugees and those receiving them. We also have Professor Sam Wineburg here. I'm very honored to have you here. He is Margaret Jack's Professor of Education and by courtesy of History and American Studies at Stanford University. He is educated at the Brown University in Berkeley and holds a doctorate in psychological studies in education from Stanford and an honorary doctorate from Sweden's Umeå University. Since 2016, his research has focused on civic online reasoning, or how people judge the credibility of information on the internet. His research has been reported in Times Magazine, the BBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, PBS, and translated into dozens of languages. Professor Sam Wineburg is here to share with us his expertise on the power of misinformation and how to avoid being part of the problem. Our fourth panelist is Janaki Kumar. Many of us know her here. She is the co-instructor of the Customer Experience Design, um, a neuroscience perspective course at Stanford Lead, and also head of design for commercial bank at JP Morgan Chase and Company. Janaki was also named as a woman of influence by the Silicon Valley Business Journal in 2016. She has co-authored the book Gamification at Work, Designing Engaging Business Software. She's also a speaker at TEDx conference and an inventor of over 20 patents. She has masters in information systems from Boston University and attended the executive leadership program at Stanford University as well. And today she will share her perspective on neuroscience of connection, war, and grief. I would now let Emily just kick us off with the session today and get on with the panels.
Right. Yes, we wanted it to be less about us and much more about the panelists. So I'd like to invite Val to speak about the experience that she's been having, and also from her perspective as a Ukrainian with family in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Emily and Deepti and everyone who's organized this. I'm super honored to be here. As Deepti said, I'm myself Ukrainian. I live in London at the moment and work for Amnesty International. But today, I'd like to speak to you from my heart and not necessarily from my professional experience, although that has come in handy in relation to what is happening in Ukraine. I come from Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, which is currently under siege, something that I could have never imagined happening. I've never imagined having to apply what I've been studying, what I've been working with to my own country. And I've never known that I would have to do that under the stress of trying to get my family to evacuate from the city, from the country. I'm currently talking to you from a hotel room in Budapest, Hungary. Half of my family has been able to escape from Kiev, and I have met them here, and I'm currently spending some time with them. Unfortunately, my grandmother, who was 85 years old, who survived the Second World War, who started off this conflict in Kiev in bomb shelters in the city, and then went on to, together with my uncle, driving all the way to the border, crossing the border into Hungary. She didn't make it, and her soul and body couldn't survive being far away from her homeland, and from where she grew up and what she's known her whole life. And so I'm trying to channel sort of my grief into things that I can do and how I can help my people, my country. Now I realize that being able to be educated and grow up abroad has given me the opportunity to really use all of that knowledge and experience in this hard time for everyone. And that's what I'm hoping to do today by speaking to you about my perspective and the perspective of the people in my country. As I said before, I specialize in digital activism and social media activism. I've done a lot of work for Amnesty, but also outside of that for a lot of civil society organizations across the world, including in Ukraine itself. A lot of my colleagues and friends are still in Ukraine, and I'm trying to support them as much as I can by providing and being their voice in sort of outside of Ukraine and speaking to people who are able to help and support people in Ukraine and give people opportunities. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I guess I'm here to answer any questions that you may have on the experience of Ukrainians, on sort of grassroots civil society activism within Ukraine, on how that is being, how the war has shaped that and given real rise to a new generation of really strong and independent activists within the country, how they have organized together for a common cause. But I'd really like to encourage you as a Ukrainian to do three things. One is to uplift the voices of Ukrainian people, because it's so important for us right now to know that we're being heard. Two is to obviously support as much as you can and donate to the causes that are dear to you, that you believe in. It doesn't have to be something specific. At the moment, there's so many different things that you can help with, from humanitarian aid to supporting women in sort of situations, vulnerable situations, to supporting people who are looking for a place, a safe place. There's so much that you can do. I just encourage you to find the right thing to do for you and support that. And then finally, I'd like the world and everyone as well to, you know, the fact that we used to do things wrong for all the other conflicts before, it doesn't mean that we need to continue doing that moving forward. And so I really would like us to use this global attention on Ukraine to really change the way that we think about people fleeing war, the way that we think about the opportunities that we give people fleeing war, and the way that we really think about supporting people affected by conflicts all across the world, not just in Ukraine. But I really hope that this will be a galvanizing moment for all of us to really refocus our attention to the things that matter for many of us, whatever that means for each and every one of you. And as I said, really grateful to be here and happy to answer questions moving forward.
Thank you so much, Val, and I'm very sorry for your loss. I shall invite now Elodie to also speak about herself. Each of the panelists will speak about their experience, and then we'll take questions. Elodie.
Thank you very much, Emily, for this opportunity to speak to such a wonderful group of people, a wonderful team, and wonderful participants. My turn also to say, Val, I'm very sorry for your loss, and sorry I have to meet you in such circumstances. As a lawyer working in immigration and refugee law for over a decade now, I have come across a lot of misinformation about who are the peoples who are refugees, who are the people who are fleeing, and what they need. And it is true that every single one of us can participate in the relief of these people, whether it's financially or because we have a safe space in our home, or because we can be a voice in the void. And I believe it's very important, if you have any questions today, that we distinguish between the impulse that some people may have. We hear a lot of differences that are being made between refugees from the Ukraine and refugees from Sudan or from Afghanistan, whilst a war remains a war. But in our case, it's true that now there is an invasion from a country on another country. It's a European country. And the discourse tends to be that, oh, look, they look like us. They're Christians. They're white. They have cars. They have homes. Yes, but that makes them need us, of course. And it mustn't make them more worthy or less worthy of our help. So our part in law is to very importantly forward the message that our help needs to be focused on what is needed, and the best to do is to follow actually the very active organizations and leaders, whether you are part of that type of organization or whether you can offer your help at the first level, which is housing someone or financing someone. There's been a wonderful initiative of sending money through Airbnb, for instance, or whether it's a bigger initiative because you want to donate clothes, you want to donate time, you want to donate blood. But in that case, it's much more complicated to organize. And sometimes multiplicating the different participations and organizing multiple events is not always the best way. There are a lot of clothes and medicine that are being sent to countries such as Hungary and Poland, which are very developed countries also. And so they're being overwhelmed with all this, all these donations, which are absolutely wonderful, but it might not be the right way. So I'll be glad to answer any questions on the importance of taking into account the different refugees and the different migrants that we meet, and the impact that we can do as a group and as a person alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elodie. It's so important what you've just said. Professor Sam Wineburg, if you'd like to introduce your area and yourself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Emily. Val, I too want to express my condolences for your loss. I study how it is that people make decisions about what to believe on the internet. And in a time of war and chaos, the internet obviously is flooded with so much unvetted information that it's really, really difficult to make decisions about what to believe and what is credible information. And we've done quite a few studies ever since 2015. We were a little bit ahead of the fake news curve with Trump in 2016. And so let me just give you a brief overview of some of the things that we've learned. What ordinary, very thoughtful and intelligent people do is when they encounter a piece of information on the internet, they marshal their critical thinking skills. They look carefully at a tweet or a Facebook post. When they go to a website that they might not be familiar with, they go to that website's about page. They will press on the links of that site. They will look and see the last time that the site was updated. There are a variety of checklists for assessing web credibility that include things like, are there spelling errors? Are there banner ads? Is the site a .org? .orgs are better than .coms. Do the links work? Do the links go to qualified or familiar venues? And people who do this are in many ways engaging in, excuse me, my dog just left my office. People who do this believe that they are engaging in critical thinking skills to carefully vet a particular website. What we've learned, however, is this is precisely what professional fact checkers at the nation's most prestigious outlets do. They do something completely different from what ordinary, intelligent lay people do who rely on their own critical thinking skills, particularly when they come to something that they don't know. What fact checkers understand is that the web is not an analog enterprise. It is not a book. It is not a piece of print that you read carefully from the beginning to the end. In fact, they engage in something that we have come to talk about as critical ignoring. Rather than critical thinking, critical ignoring, recognizing that our time is very limited, our attention is limited, and the goal of many of these sites is to sap our attention, to draw us in, to believe that the longer that we stay on their site, the greater the chance is that we'll be sucked into their vortex of misinformation. So what does it mean to understand that the web is a web and the way to use it is to exploit its web-like qualities? I think I can boil it down and make it very simple in a very short phrase. The phrase is, get off the page. When you don't know a familiar organization, then the better than looking at their about page and trying to see if they're verified on Twitter and looking at their board of directors. There are, again, I'll take an example from an anti-vaxxer group, Robert Kennedy's Children's Health Defense. If you look at the board of the directors, there's actually a Nobel Prize winner. Now he's infamous, but if you're not already a specialist in that, you will say, wow, look at this very esteemed group of directors. The best thing to do is, rather than to essentially invest your intention into an unfamiliar source, leave it. And what professional fact checkers do is they open up multiple tabs, they learn about the organization, and they make a quick judgment about whether a particular venue is deemed worthy of their very, very precious attention. So I can talk more about this. We've done large-scale studies. The largest study of American youth high school students are digital natives who supposedly are native to digital devices. And we show that they are more digitally naive than they are digitally native. 52% fell for a video supposedly about vote tampering in the United States when it was actually a video in Russia. We've done work with academics who in many ways are closer to young people than they are to professional fact checkers, in part because they are deeply invested in their own intelligence. I'll end by quoting one of the fact checkers at one of the nation's most esteemed magazines. And she said to us that the enemy of fact checking is hubris, thinking that you can tell what something is simply by looking at it and applying your critical thinking skills. I'll pause there.
Fantastic. Thank you. What a brilliant phrase to end on. Thank you so much. And now I'll pass to Janaki to introduce herself. And following that, I know people have been joining, so we've introducing the panelists. And following that, we will take a question and answer session. So Janaki, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily. And Val, my deepest condolences to you. I'm really sorry for this loss and the tragedy that we are all experiencing. When Emily asked me to be part of this panel, I asked her, do you really want me? I am not an expert in the topics that you're talking about. I come from a different background. But Emily and I had a conversation, and based on this conversation, I did agree to be on the panel. And all I can speak about is my lens, which is the lens of empathy. And I can bring in the neuroscience principles that have informed me in other situations and do what I can to perhaps add a little bit to this conversation. So I'm very honored to be on the same panel with experts such as yourself. So let me just add my little piece to this. So this crisis is deeply saddening, especially as we as the world are just kind of coming out of the COVID pandemic, and we're just starting to come out of our homes and feel a little bit secure thanks to the vaccines, and now we have a war. So I was asking myself, what is the vaccine for war, right? What is going to prevent us, and what vaccine will help protect us from war? And there's no really easy answer to this, but a few things caught my attention recently. Noah Yuval Harari, as you all know, he's a very famous author. He's written very many books. He's a historian by profession. And he said something very interesting. He said, I feel ashamed of my profession. And when the person asked, why is that? He said, recently, Macron, who's the Prime Minister of France, had a conversation with Putin and tried to convince him that this is not the right thing to do. And Putin had a lot of good arguments based on, not good arguments, arguments based on history. And Noah heard that, and it just deeply saddened him that history can be used to create this justification for these bad acts. So I thought about that, and I also think about my, the tragedy that has been closer to home with, with colonization, as well as, so many other crises. And what Mahatma Gandhi said is that an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. And so putting all of these thoughts together and applying the neuroscience principles, it becomes very clear that at this moment in time, we have to think about the power of the narrative and try to keep our hopes, especially for the next generation. I think the tragedy that is unfolding in front of us is terrible, it's tragic, but I worry about the reverberations of this narrative across multiple generations. And how do we protect our children? What is the vaccine for that? And I think it is definitely the power of the narrative. We, of course, have to remember the victims. At the same time, we have to take control of our narrative in such a way that for every, there are many, many sparks of heroism that are happening. And I think it was already mentioned by the panelists. There are stories such as, acts of kindness, acts of heroism that are happening. So every bad news that we hear, try to consume at least 5, genuine acts of good news. And then Professor Sam brings up another point about the misinformation. But what I mean to say is that we are all, as global citizens, have to protect ourselves as well. And we have to keep our hopes up through the use of the narrative. And at the end of the day, and this act is what will help us vaccinate the next generation from the reverberations of war. Thank you.
Thank you, Janaki. And I'm very glad that you agreed to be part of this panel. Everybody has very different perspectives on this panel, and there are more. We could always invite more, to learn even better by including more voices and having more diverse views. So I think that every one of you will be fantastic for us to learn exactly like these kinds of questions as well, about how do we manage our own energies and our own, even if we might feel extremely grateful and lucky that we're not as directly impacted as others. And, on this call, there are people through the whole scale, from people extremely impacted to people looking on and feeling perhaps helpless. And so all of your perspectives are extremely useful to our group of people and our audience. So I would like to kick off the questions. I've got an excellent question here from Kervin, who gave this question. Thank you, Kervin. And I'd like each one of you to answer this question, because I think you all have a very different answer to it. It's about having a friend close. So this person has a friend close that feels a lot of anxiety about the news. How can someone help and respond to that friend, and maybe themselves? So I certainly have a lot of anxiety about the news. So Janaki, how would you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about, the anxiety. And I have a young daughter, and she's a teenager. It's come to a point where the news causes her a lot of anxiety. And I worry that, when we are in an anxious state, from a neuroscience perspective, we are immediately going into a fight or flight mode, or we're kind of in a survival mode. And at this moment in time, our higher order thinking is not activated. And this is the moment in time when we do need to activate our creative energies and come up with creative and interesting new solutions, because these are very important problems. So I think the only thing I can say to this person is take care of themselves. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first before we can help others. And when you're not getting the oxygen to yourself, that analogy goes further. It's not going to your brain. You're not thinking straight. You're not of help to others. So taking care of yourself and making sure that you're making good choices is so important before we get overwhelmed with everything else that's going on around us.
Thank you, Janaki. It's a fantastic answer. How would you answer that question, Professor Sam?
Well, I have very little to add to Janaki's. I think her advice is excellent. I also see that the act of anxiety I see a positive quality to it. It means that people care. It means that people, they are not indifferent to the suffering of others. And in some ways, to see the kind of images that we see, anxiety is an appropriate response to them, to see that it's what Marx called our species being. This is happening to members of our species. They are helpless. They are without shelter. They're being bombed, and the worst thing that can happen is when we say we have nothing to do with them. They live in a different country. They don't interfere in our lives, and it's not my problem. And that kind of indifference is, to me, a much greater threat to our humanity than the anxiety, which I think accompanies seeing people in crisis.
Thank you so much. Val?
Sorry, did you say Val first?
Yes.
I would just like to say that obviously, as everyone has said, anxiety is sort of a natural reaction to this, right? So it's just acknowledging that, accepting that, and trying to take care of yourself. And just going back as well to what Janaki was saying, you might think that as a Ukrainian, I don't want to be talking about, hopeful narratives and positive things that have come out of this, because I'm obviously quite impacted by it, and family is impacted. But actually, I've been working for a very long time, not very long time, but some time within the field of hope-based communication. And the reason for that is that essentially, Ukraine and other countries neighboring to Russia have been living under this sort of constant opposing narrative that has been making it very hard for us to not respond to it. And the only way for us to actually overcome it and deal with our own anxiety and deal with a lot of these feelings that we're experiencing is to create our own hopeful, positive narrative about the future, about why we're fighting, what we're fighting for, what we're trying to build, what the values are that we are fighting for and we represent. And really, like, the amount of incredible stories that have come out of Ukraine, and obviously a lot of other countries prior to Ukraine during war have really shown the spirit of resilience in people, and have really allowed us to create that sort of feeling that human beings are not hopeless, and even in the worst of situations we are able to do something to help. We are able to really change the way that situations are operating. And just to say as well, like, I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of responding directly to sort of, as I said, the narrative that is perhaps unhelpful at the moment to Ukraine and its people and the world. And by responding to that, we only reinforce that. So our only option is to actually respond by creating our own future, our own narratives, our own ways of thinking, to really ensure that our future is clearly defined for us in our hearts, in our minds. And I mean, not just for Ukrainians, but in general for everyone across the world. So I would say just try and read those stories of resilience and try and focus on those Ukrainian voices that are building that future for ourselves and others.
Thank you very much, Val. And it's, having your perspective of hearing of someone, at the extreme end of the scale of experiencing anxiety and still able to find a coping mechanism that you have is extremely inspiring, and itself hopeful for everybody else. I know it's easy to get paralyzed by the pandemic. It was enough to paralyze plenty of people. And then to have this happening at this time when there was a moment of hope opening up for people is quite, I can imagine, very debilitating for a lot of people. So it's so important to be able to find that way through. Elodie, how do you see this question from your experience?
Thank you, Emily. This last place after all the things that have been said, I'm not sure my input is going to be very useful. So I'm going to be the devil's advocate in this case. I'm amazed after the pandemic, the wars, the migrant crisis, that we all still have hope. And that's what the others were saying. Having hope is the most important part. Then again, one of the first things that I've learned when I became a lawyer in immigration and asylum law was, if you're crying with your client, you can't help him. You can't. If you're depressed by your client, If you are completely overwhelmed with anxiety, you cannot do your job. So being anxious, being sad, having emotions is absolutely normal and human, and it's healthy to have it. But we must also, as Janaki was saying, be very careful with ourselves and try to follow in the footsteps of people that sometimes tend to be able to take a little bit of a distance to look at it. Of course, after years of pandemic, after years of hearing all of those lives in the Mediterranean and the different wars, it's very difficult to keep this hope, but we need the hope and we need the work to keep the hope up. So having breakdowns and having moments where you're going to find it more and more difficult is normal. Give yourself some time, give yourself time to heal, give yourself, of course, I'm not at the same end of the spectrum as most of you. Taking that time is indispensable if you absolutely want to continue contributing. When we're lucky, I have no family in Ukraine, I have no links. I'm very lucky not to have some of my closest loved ones that are living through that. And I think that's the position that I can have. I can be supportive without adding to the anxiety, and being supportive with my work, of course, by being a shoulder to cry on as well. But I think that most of the people know exactly where they want to go to cry on a shoulder, and that's probably not mine.
Those were some great thoughts from all four of you, and how much, in such situations, we tend to get into this fight or flight mode, and taking care of yourself first is so much more important, as Janaki said. And also agree that these act of anxiety also shows that we really care, which is so important, right? And I love the phrase that you used, Elodie, that if you are sad with your client, you can't help them. And I think that's something which we all need to really understand and kind of take into account. To shift gears a bit on the lens of misinformation, Professor Sam, you talked about critical thinking that relates more to the digital media, I believe. We have a question here from Kervin in the chat here that he says, I want to know how to support channels which reach Russia to the Russian people, right? I mean, this is more something which has been news now, not coming in social media, but really presented by the government itself or managed by them. So do you have any thoughts there?
Well, as we all read, the Putin's government is gone to great lengths to try to block the normal social media challenges. Obviously, there are ways around these things, that where there are blocks, there are hacks around the blocks. And so to simply accept the fact that Facebook messages or Twitter messages can't get through, or Instagram messages, is I think an overly pessimistic view. These things do get through, even when there is censorship toward the platforms. And there are a variety of other platforms that are being used and sprouting up all the time. So I think that one cannot despair and say, okay, because Putin has closed off communication, nothing is getting through. I think that one persists, because even if the majority of things don't get through, there will be news bits that do evade these kinds of censors. So I think one must persist.
Thank you so much, Professor Sam. And at the same time, I mean, if you really had to talk about the information in the war, there is always propaganda from all parties. And can you provide tips on how to create a better picture from this information clutter, news and propaganda?
Well, the first piece of advice would be to be distrustful of a single unknown source, no matter which side that it comes from. And so, I mean, our screens are flooded with all kinds of videos and pictures. If we see a picture that seems particularly gripping to us, again, there are a variety of ways. If we really want to engage in whether it is true or if it's something that's fabricated, a simple reverse image search, clicking on a Mac, a right click on a PC, your control panel will bring in for Google a little screen that says search Google for this image. And oftentimes as little as 15 or 20 seconds with that little trick will give you an indication that this particular picture, actually one that just came that was debunked or revealed, of a young girl talking back to a Russian soldier, was actually something that was taken in the West Bank, and it was a Palestinian girl speaking to an Israeli soldier. Again, so there is the awareness that so much of what we see visually is being repurposed for propagandistic means is the first kind of end of innocence. And then again, the best piece of advice would be to, if you're not already an expert at verifying online media, which has a certain degree of expertise, then rely on venues that are, rather than thinking that you can look at something and determine its truthfulness. When you start to see it corroborated across Reuters, across the AP, across a variety of news sources, then you can increase the probability that it's something that you can depend upon. But if it's something that just simply flows across your social media feed and looks compelling and looks tragic, then one should be cautious. I'm purposely saying not skeptical. I think skepticism leads to a kind of solipsism that you can't know anything. And that's not true, even in a time of war. So we can know things when they've been corroborated and they've been vetted by people with the expertise to tell us that this is something that we can trust.
Thank you. We have another question from Harpreet, which is a question to both, well, to pretty much everyone on the panel, I think. But you know, you're here. In this tragedy, how do we make sure that no new seeds of hatred are sown, which will hit back humanity in years to come? Injustice done by Putin should not lead to injustice committed upon Russians years from now. I invite you all to respond to that. Janaki, you're unmuted.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about, the reverberations of war and just continuing to justify future acts of violence for what's happening right now. And but there was this beautiful little anecdote that I saw on Twitter, that the Ukrainian army captured a bunch of Russian soldiers, and they happened to be just young kids, 19-year-old, 18-year-old children. And these boys had, they allowed them to call their moms. And the tweet was about a video of these children calling their parents, and the parents are asking, "What? Where are you? What are you doing?" You know, so it was just a touching human moment. If you just take away all the background, it just, I think that is the antidote, right? Like sometimes when we attach nationalistic meaning, it becomes overwhelming, and we as humans just have to be kinder to ourselves. And when we are evaluating acts based on human values of kindness, of compassion, of empathy, of connectedness, we find that we have a lot more in common. And then that's the seed, right, that will bloom into more of the flowers that we want. So that's the only thing that comes to mind.
I can jump in as well, if that's helpful. You may need to fact check my next statement, but I'm going to speak from personal feeling and experience. Again, as I said before, I think that at the moment, Ukraine is actually, what's happening in Ukraine is sort of those seeds of hatred that have been spread for a very long time coming to, fruition in what is happening. And that means that as Ukrainians, we understand better than anyone what hatred towards someone else can do, and it can actually mobilize, armies and move mountains. And I think what I'm hearing from a lot of my friends back at home is that, the Ukrainian people, we're trying to be as sort of channeling our humanity as much as we can in how we respond to a lot of the things. Of course, sometimes it's hard, and of course, sometimes people, blow up and say things that, are maybe they shouldn't have. But everyone's reaction right now, I think, who is personally affected, I think may not be, it's not acceptable, but it's in some sense understandable. Of course, if it doesn't, cross certain red lines. But what I just wanted to say is that as people who are affected by that sort of narrative of hatred and feeling of hatred towards someone else, I think for years to come, that's for us as Ukrainians super important to understand and sort of be guided by that. We are not going to respond to hatred with hatred, and we need to be able to respond to that with, I'm going to go back to this again and say, but with sort of a hope for a better future for all of us, right? Like, we don't want anyone to suffer. We just want to be able to live peacefully on our land, in our country, safely and security. And so I think it's just sometimes, dialing back and understanding that and being more aware of that as Ukrainians, but globally, I guess, as well.
Well, it is so well said. I mean, the only way is not responding to hatred with hatred. And I believe Janaki also mentioned in the beginning what Mahatma Gandhi said, that an eye for an eye makes the world blind. So perhaps that's the only way to look at it. Moving on to maybe Elodie, leaning into your experience, we are witnessing right now millions of children with their mothers traveling to other countries in a very short time frame right now. What could be done to reduce the trauma of refugees arriving in neighboring countries, especially children?
It depends on a lot of things. It depends whether people in the country are sensitive to welcoming those refugees, as well as the institutions, of course, because if the people are willing to help, but the government isn't, that makes things a lot more difficult. We've observed that notably in the Balkans, when the Pakistani and Afghani refugees would come along the borders. So if there are some programs that are already implemented, such as trauma centers, medical centers, and housing centers that have been put together, the best is to offer help to those organizations, should they be powered by the state or by civil-led organizations. There are lots of platforms that have been put together as well. I don't know for the other countries, but in France, a lot of NGOs have been created with platforms that offer, like, you can stay a night in my place, or I have a free flat. And that civilian participation at our level might be, for the moment, the best thing to do, because the European Union has not decided completely whether they're going to give a protection to everyone, if this protection will be pertaining to the Geneva Convention or to another international legally binding text that will allow people not only to remain in a country, but also to work there, to rent an apartment. And the best is to offer the help, actually say, okay, I'm here, this is what I can do, this is what I can give. If you are a doctor, You can go and subscribe to a list where you can offer free counseling. If you are a cook, there's only so many things that we can do that are actually useful. And I've had people talking about eventually offering jobs. It's interesting because it comes from a very good place, but finding a job when you've left everything behind is not the first thing on a refugee's mind, especially not a child. So offering a place to play, some available toys eventually, or playing with your children, or some lessons in the local language. Those are very helpful things to make those people feel welcome and integrated. Time for the legal process to be put together. We will not be able, for the moment and at our level, to make everybody feel welcome and everybody settled in within a week. We don't know how long this war is going to last. We don't know if the Ukrainian people who have fled will have to stay for a very long time within other countries or not, if they want to settle indefinitely in those other countries, or if they want to go home. So the only thing we can do is listen to the needs that are being expressed and offering what may be asked for at that point. Doing more than that might be a little too overwhelming for the people coming in. In France right now, for instance, and that's why I was saying there's a difference that is being made between Afghan refugees, Syrian refugees, and Ukrainians. We have a big problem in France for housing people. Every year, about half of our asylum seekers do not have housing which is established by the state, by the government. And suddenly, the Ukrainian war starts, Russia invades Ukraine, and we have more places to welcome Ukrainian people than there are actually Ukrainian people on French soil. So there are other needs that can be met. And I think that communicating on those needs and, as I said, offering what we can, law, medicine, toys, language courses, is the best course to act for the moment, especially for the kids, showing them that life can be normal, even though it's very hard for them to imagine that they can go back to a normal life.
Elodie, I've got a question that's come in privately to me, which is related to this. So it's about someone saying, here in Switzerland, the schools are sending government links to donate for refugees, and also governments are giving incentives to host refugees at home. How do you see that behavior?
I think it's great. I think it's great because there is nothing better to go back to normality than being integrated into a population. Of course, when housing is given out by the authorities, which is organized by the government and by the national administration, it is the job of our authorities, literally. Like, an asylum seeker comes to see you as a country, you have to enable that person to seek asylum, to wait for the legal procedure to unfold in good conditions. So with housing, a minimum of money, a minimum of food, a minimum of clothing. But it is kind of setting those people aside. I've heard that at some point in the UK, they were giving them bracelets and painting the doors red. That reminds us of very, very dark times where yellow.
I think we've lost connection with Elodie. Elodie, I think we've lost you.
Of the people that live there is absolutely beautiful. It's beautiful. It's
Elodie, you cut out, so we lost a couple of sentences before you said everything. You actually ended on dark and then began again on beautiful. So it was we lost in between.
I'll try to rephrase it quickly. So yes, it's one of the best things that can be done is offering a sense of normality and not having those people that live in only special housing places with only because in France they have like a kind of a card, which is not a credit card because you cannot take money from it. You cannot outtake money. You can only go and buy food in some specific shops and everything. So you're really, really discriminated in some sort. And bringing the people within the civilian population is amazing. It's one of the best things that can be suggested, I believe. I don't know if everyone can do it, of course. For instance, I cannot do it because that would mean my clients would know where I live, which is not something possible for my family or for my job. But people who have the space, who have the patience, and who have the courage to do it are amazing.
Thank you so much. Before Deepti asks the next question, I want to invite people to do put your questions in the chat. So we've got a chat moderation system going on. So do put them in there so that we can get them answered. Go ahead, Deepti.
Thanks. So true, Elodie. I really believe in what you're saying, that integration is so much more important than just, kind of right now making space for them. We have one of the questions for Professor Sam again, which is a very relevant question. How do you get people to become better at identifying misinformation when people want to be in echo chambers or don't want to hear other opinions?
Well, this is a question that goes deep to the heart of human nature. I think that the species has been dealing with it at least since Cain killed Abel. So, the idea, if you are dead set on what you believe and there is nothing that can change your mind, then this is perhaps the holy grail of human psychology. And it's certainly not anything that I can tell you. There's no recipe. There's no, the only thing that I can say about that is something that I'm sure that we all understand. That yelling at people, that raising our voice, that trying to give them logical arguments and to fact check when they are deep in the throes of an ideology is to ignore that oftentimes when people embrace ideas that go against data, that go against facts, it's not a flaw in logic. It's something that's deeply connected to their identity. And it's actually not the problem that I work on. I work on a much simpler problem. I think that the problem of deep motivated reasoning and confirmation bias that's above my pay grade. I am much more concerned with what I call the searcher of goodwill, the person who goes online to try to figure out what is going on and is bombarded by different information sources and throws up their hands and says, I don't know what to believe. That person, at least through goodwill, is seeking an answer. And that's really that's the focus of our research, not the dyed-in-the-wool ideologue for whom no argument can change. The searcher of goodwill, there are a variety of things that we can do that help that person understand how to get to a better source, not a perfect source, but to a better source. Again, just without, we have for people who are interested, I'll put it in the chat. We have a full curriculum that we've done RCT studies that have showed its effectiveness. There's over close to a half a dozen studies that show it, but just to give you a few tips to take with you. First, when you search something, try to use neutral search terms. Your browser, whether it's Bing or whether it's Google, is in many ways a mirror. Your browser is trying to serve you and speak to what it detects you want. So to give a trivial example, our Cats Good Pets will get you a variety of sites that will be positive toward cats, as opposed to search terms are of cats as pets. So that the act of putting good will immediately, it's like a tell in poker. Google will see that tell and give you what it is that you want. So just the way of neutrally searching is a powerful tip. And second, to understand just the whole system of search engine optimization, that the vast majority of people who search press on the first 3 results they get on the search engine results page. And that is often deeply influenced by search engine optimization, which is the crafty gaming of keywords to get your site up to the top part of Google's real estate and to push your competition down to the dungeon. So what we see fact checkers do is they see the search engine results page as a gestalt. They understand that the top results don't mean that they are the most trustworthy results. And they try to get a sense of what kind of information neighborhood have I fallen into? And then they make a judicious first click rather than a promiscuous first click. So that's just a few tips to take with you.
Deepti, if I can add one more sentence to what Sam just said. In neuroscience, they say that the brain rationalizes the decision the heart has already made. So I think the way to solve this problem is through the heart. You know, there are some amazing ways of empathy studies. You know, I think to show how similar we are as humans and kind of remind ourselves of our common humanity, that might be one way to think about it.
Thank you very much for those very helpful responses and tips and really great ways to help us shift our mindsets as well, from whichever perspective we might be coming from. I want to encourage you to read the chat. There's some really great comments and thoughts in there from Priyanka and Jean and others. So do have a look at those. Thank you for putting those comments in there. I want to just ask everybody on the panel one final question before we then move forward. What is one takeaway you would wish this audience from this session today? What would you like them to remember and take, given the context that we're all living in and knowing a little bit about the background of this audience? Starting with Val.
Sorry, my computer is playing up and everything's really slow. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, as I said, I briefly mentioned before the 3 sort of key takeaways that I would like everyone to remember, which is to listen and uplift Ukrainian voices, to also be able to, give opportunities to people fleeing war, Ukrainians or not in general, and also to try and donate as much as you can to the particular needs that are close to you in this situation. And Emily, I don't know if now is the time, but one of the many things that have been trying to occupy my mind and time with is that we've actually set up
It seems that now is not the time because she got cut off, but I hope that she will be able to come back very soon. So Elodie, do you want to share with us one takeaway that you would like people to take from this session?
Thank you, Emily. I would say that one thing that everyone is able to do, no matter what country you're from, no matter how much you earn, no matter what language you speak or what job. Someone's mic is on.
Juana, can you do a sweep again? Okay, I think we're back. It might have been Val joining again. Good to see that you're back, Val. Go ahead, Elodie.
Trying to connect, Emily.
So yes, the one outtake would be speak speak and speak the truth. It's very important. Communication in war, in humanitarian law, in human rights is very, very important. And one thing that is open to all is righting the wrongs and bringing the information to the people who tend to ignore things willingly or not. And talking about the war, talking about things that are being done, talking about what's happening is already a very good start. I think that would be my only input. Yes.
Thank you. Janaki?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to just leave with the question, what is the vaccine for war, right? I think we need to inoculate ourselves from this pain for now and for the future. I'm especially thinking about the next generation. And I also just want to think about that different people have different tolerances for anxiety. So just be aware as you're talking about heavy topics with those around you, especially young people. They're very impressionable, and we just have to be kinder and more aware. So, not everyone has the capacity to think about these very big topics. So just be cautious as you are speaking about this. And obviously look for hope. Even Val, who's just gone through personal tragedy, if she can show us the way through hope, each one of us can, so I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Yes. Val, if you are able to take the mic again to finish what you were going to say, otherwise we can come back to it a bit later.
I'm here. I'm just calling you from my phone. Apologies, my computer died completely. But Emily, would you tell me what was the last thing I said you heard me say?
The last thing you said is you weren't sure if this was a good time.
Oh, that's an awkward moment to leave on. But I was just going to say that one of the things that I've been channeling my time and attention into to be able to sort of cope with this was trying to help people who have been able to flee war with finding jobs. Whether that is freelance jobs or otherwise more permanent types of employment. We set up sort of like, we saw at one point that there was loads of Google Docs flying around with opportunities available in academia, in various industries, in the art world, and so many different things. And so we just put it together into a search engine type thing website, which is called jobsforukraine.net. And what we're looking for right now is as many people as possible. If you or anyone you know is able to offer these opportunities, then please get in touch with me or just visit jobsforukraine.net. And I just wanted to end on a note that I think for all of us, we're a little bit in disbelief that this may be a permanent situation for us as Ukrainians. A lot of friends who I'm talking to, my parents, my uncle, I think we don't feel like it's something that we need to live with now. And so the more opportunities that we can give people to support themselves, even if in the short term, I think the better it would be for all of us to sort of move on and as some other speakers were saying, kind of cope with what is happening. So that is a message from me.
Thank you, Val. And regarding the initiative of the jobs, how do people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn or get in touch with me on Twitter or visit the actual website, and my email is, I believe, on it. So I think I'm happy to share my email as well with all of you. I think, Emily, you have it. So there's a couple of other platforms that are doing similar things. We're all working towards the same goal and we all did it at the same time. But this is just the one that we set up, myself and a couple of other volunteers. So yeah, please do visit it.
Thank you. And do again check in the chat. Sam has shared some great links, so well worth reviewing the chat again and opening up those links before they disappear behind the chat. Sam, do you have anything to add on top of those links that you've shared?
I would just affirm what Val and Janaki have said of the need to keep our hearts open, to stave off a feeling of indifference, of impotence, and to ask ourselves what we can do. The only thing that I would add for those of us who rely upon digital devices to learn about the world is to engage in what we call click restraint. That often our hearts and often our emotions will lead us to click on the first thing that pulls at our heartstrings, and we'll share it and we'll post it. And in many cases, that can lead to us polluting the information supply. And so to express a little click restraint, to recognize that there's an awful lot of debris that's floating around that looks authentic, and to be wary and to do a few checks before we decide to share it with our circle of friends.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Huge, please, use your reactions buttons and huge round of applause to thank you, Janaki, Sam, Elodie, and Val. You've, as I said at the beginning, you came around out of nowhere, getting a message from me asking you to be available. Some of you at awkward times to give to us when you yourselves, probably have lots of needs right now. So thank you very much for this gift to our community of the excellent advice and thoughts and ways that we can be supportive to ourselves as well as to those who are impacted. I want to now ask Grisha Safarian, who's on the line, to tell us about the initiative that the LEAD community has developed so that we can learn more about that act that we can also take.
Thank you, Emily. So it might be just a drop in the ocean of Ukraine's population need, but we decided a few days ago, thanks to the power of our community and the reactivity, we decided to launch fundraising that is directly channeling the money to the International Red Cross Committee. So they have expressed a need of about $110 million to face immediate needs, financial needs in Ukraine for the civilian population. We are contributing to this as much as we can. So the link, I've been posting the link several times on the chat group. The principle of the fundraising is to create a pipeline which is based on three pillars of strategy. The first one is efficiency. So we made it very easy to donate during this webinar. Apparently, there were a few people who acted because the money was going up. So efficiency, transparency, which is extremely important in any type of fundraising. So the money goes directly via GoFundMe to the International Red Cross, and out of $100 given, $93.5 will reach the target, so the civilian population. And finally, the third strategic pillar is direct community impact, of course, in this case, through the Red Cross as well. So we encourage all of you to share the link as much as possible. The fundraising is gaining traction. We started this a few days ago. We are at the level of $12,000 now, and we can see that things are accelerating. So again, it's a small action, small drop in the ocean, but at least we are doing something to the best of our ability and activating a community of LEAD alumni that is showing that they want to, they try to have an impact. And I would like to say also, as my last word, that I was amazed looking at what's happening in Ukraine to see also a lot of reaction of organizations and companies that do not want to accept what is happening. And you know, you see a lot of divestment, you see companies withdrawing. So I don't want to engage in the debate to see if it's the right thing to do or not, but I mean, this is a particular dynamic that I have not really seen before in any other similar situation. So thanks to everybody to contribute to our small fundraising. And thank you, Emily, for giving me the floor for a few minutes.
Thank you, Grisha, and everyone who's been involved in that campaign, which again was turned around very quickly. And it was, again, a story of our community coming together to take action. There was another kind of frame of thought that was shared in other chats about this session, about questions, which I don't know if there's a particular answer, and someone, you should definitely interrupt me, panelists, if you can answer this, but it's about the experience, for example, I've had this week, and many in this call today that are related to the LEAD program. You know, the turn of events over the last couple of weeks has been an absolute roller coaster because I've gone from, you know, horror and shock of this happening, that's something that seems so far from the past, something we've put behind us, or we hoped, we had a very strong hope that it was behind us, and so much had been done, and there was so much infrastructure and so much work gone into making sure nothing like this happens again. And here it is, so seemingly so easy to start again. And at the same time, you know, many of us, we have jobs, we have to get on with things, we have other joys in our lives. We have the LEAD alumni Me Too We get together, which has been virtual and in person and has been full of joy. There's, you know, there's going to be things in your lives like new loves and crazily happily things going on in your lives, while at the same time there's this backdrop of having been through a pandemic which hasn't actually been declared over, although sometimes we think maybe it is. And that's another thing that's been very uncertain about, are we done with that, or is it coming back? And we've been through these waves. And I don't know, maybe Janaki, you could just say a few words from the neuroscience perspective. Like, is it normal to feel crazy, I suppose, that you're having at this site? Do you have all these extremes of emotions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Emily. I mean, you summed it up really beautifully. I don't have much more to add, but to echo what you just said. The feeling of the overwhelmingness is very true. And I think as human beings, you know, we're just like specks, you know, in this vast ocean of humanity. And how I come back to this, right? Just protect yourself. When we are overwhelmed, we are not thinking straight. We are not really useful to the people that we need to help. I think we just need to center ourselves. You know, every day I can share with you my rituals for staying centered. I do some meditation. I write some journals, finding some quiet time. You know, Sam, to your point about limiting our media, I try to limit my media consumption to certain hours in the day, and I go for very reputed sources like National Public Radio, BBC, and you know, it's only when I'm actually late night overwhelmed that I doom scroll. You know, it's just I can notice my own behaviors. So just knowing yourself, knowing how your tendencies are, and if we all, you know, we are all agents of change for good, right? I think the fact that you've taken time to be part of this community already shows that you care and you want to be a force for good. How can you be the force for good? You need to arm yourself, you know, take care of yourself, your body, your mind, and then your force will multiply, and this will overcome the darkness that we see on the other side.
I actually wanted to finish on a poem because I feel that could be a good moment to have a moment of reflection. This is something that I found from the Stanford library, the bookstore. So it's actually a Stanford author. Don't know if you can see that, Flyover Country. I literally had help from the bookstore person working there, and she came up with this for my request for a poem for this session. So I'm just going to read it to you, and I think the idea of this is that we're going to finish after this poem. This has been a moment to really learn and think about stuff, and I hope that you will take time to reflect and think about your own personal plan and your own emotions and how you cope with this. And as the tips you've heard from Janaki, the tips from Sam, the realities we've heard from Elodie and Val, and how inspiring they are, that they work so dedicatedly in this area, not only on personal reasons but also professionally. And so I feel like it's a good idea to finish quietly. And so that's my objective with reading this poem. So just join me to listen. It's called The Bombing of Hospitals. There was a time when they were kept far away from the front, unafraid for their lives. The nurses moved calmly through the wards, carrying trays of shrapnel stewed in blood. Days were slow. Letters came to say that elsewhere, babies were being born, novels being published, plays being produced. The letters, which had already been opened by the time they reached the men they were addressed to, said between the lines that there was a world yet untouched by the war, a world they would be returning to once they healed. Some of the letters contained news from the front, far enough away to have to be born in the form of language, not as light and noise, and not as the news of the latest battle was read out loud. The war seemed like a nightmare they had had in common and had woken from together all at once. There was time for flirtations to flare between nurses and patients, a few affairs. Smoking between amputations. The surgeons laughed under the trees, their bloody shirt sleeves rolled up, while in the garden convalescents hobbled about on crutches, played croquet, fell asleep in wheelchairs. Apple blossoms fallen into their hair. Their only fear was that gangrene would set in, that they would be the next to turn quiet and toward the wall. They feared flies and bedsores, bad news from home, the sudden appearance of a friend who'd been gravely wounded. But the hospital itself, built of bricks or boards, or composed of rows of linen tents pitched in a field, in a rush, was understood by all to be protected by the presence of the wounded themselves, who knew no new harm could come to them, only the old harm find a firmer hold and pull them under. So it's a sad poem, but I feel it's kind of got rays of light and sunshine, and a little bit about the reality that even in, the hospitals, so there is love, flourishing and laughter. And that's a bit like the days that we're experiencing, where we have these incredible experiences like the alumni meetup at Me2We and getting to know each other better, and this very dark context, but that we can come together and help. And this force of this community has been incredible, that very quickly coming together to support each other, and those people impacted either directly or indirectly. So thank you so much for coming to this session. Sam has had to go. Thank you, Val, really for having the courage and the energy to be here today, to educate us and to help us be a better support, and also not add to the things that aren't helpful. I think Elodie, you also spoke about that. And Janaki, particularly, I feel it's just a greater understanding of empathy towards others, but also looking after ourselves. So thank you very much for coming to this session. please use the links that Grisha is so conscientiously putting into the chat and sharing everywhere. If you want one first thing that you can do because you're touched by this or because it moves you in any way, is either share the link to people outside LinkedIn, by email, by WhatsApp, whatever, donate, or get involved and contact Val because you have an idea that that could be something you could get involved in, or find some other way that to be of support, because first of all, that will be helpful to people. I think it will also be helpful to you to do something positive. Thank you very much. And Chris is posting that we've gone up to 13,000, so that's good news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.